I watched all the video and I look at all the comments that some so-called experts make, and really, they shouldn't be saying things. They need to hear the information directly from the airline and from the government. They don't need to find it out in the newspaper.
Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is John Goglia, and I have been a person who investigates airplane accidents and other type of transportation accidents for quite a long time. And I have taken special interest in this Korean Airlines accident because of the unusual set of circumstances that have so far been disclosed in the events leading up to the accidents.
You said it is unusual circumstances, right? What are your thoughts on this?
So have an airplane land with the landing gear up right off the bat is an unusual set of circumstances. And then when they talked about the bird strike, from the video, you would look at the engines, and it's not clear if the engine was still functioning. It does look like it, but it's not clear. And one of the things that as an accident investigator we all do is that we don't make assumptions. And it was pretty obvious on the tape that it looked faster than normal, but also he had a severe nose-down attitude, which is very unusual when you're making a landing, because we want to be back a couple miles from the airport with what's called a stabilized approach. A stabilized approach is when the airplane is just in an attitude to land at the airport, but it's not making any other moves. So it's getting very stable. And it was clear that this was not a stabilized approach. That's also very unusual. So that raises questions.
Many experts have pointed out that the aircraft's main braking systems, landing gear, flaps, and engine thrust reversers did not appear to function properly in the video. Do you agree?
I don't agree because of one word, function. We don't know that if the captain lowered the landing gear. We don't know any of the circumstances around the human interface with the airplane. And that would be determining whether or not the airplane had a problem or whether or not the pilots had a problem. So until we know that, we can't say one way or the other it was the airplane or if it was the pilot. All areas. I watched all the video and I look at all the comments that some so-called experts make. And really, they shouldn't be saying things because we don't have enough facts to make an intelligent comment yet. So any real thorough accident investigator would not be making comments at this point because we just don't have enough information to make any kind of a determination. I mean, all we know right now is the airplane came in very fast. It went through some unusual gyrations to get back lined up with the airport. It landed with its landing gear up, and it hit a retaining wall. So the questions here are, what was going on in the cockpit? Why did the landing gear not get lowered, or did it have a problem? Were the engines both functioning? And why did a structure such as that not have better protection around it for an airplane? It's supposed to be frangible, and they may very well have been a frangible structure, but the foundation is in concrete, and it was too the pictures make it look like it may not have been properly constructed, but it's too early to even say that. Very common to have that. Very common to go into an accident and based upon the first things you see, you start to make conclusions, but then as you gather the facts, the story changes and you have to change your opinion. And that has happened many, many, many times in investigations. Even video footage, even all kinds of eyewitness testimony. I mean, there were all sorts of this information coming at the investigators from all kinds of different directions. But then in the long run, we find out that none of it was fully accurate, and the data, the facts that we collect at the accident site and the data we collect from many other sources will tell a different story. Not uncommon. Certainly the landing gear was retracted on landing, and certainly he tried. The early piece of the video shows a very, very almost desperate attempt on the part of the pilot to get the airplane back on the ground. So that alone would tell the investigators that something must have happened in the cockpit or to the airplane after he started his turn on the go-around that led him to believe that he had to get on the ground immediately. So they're going to be focusing on that area, and hopefully the voice recorder will have some verbiage between the captain and the co-pilot to give clues to what to look for. But it's clearly he was very, very intent and speedy on trying to get that airplane back on the ground. So something must have really caught his attention that he needed to get back on the ground. Well, it's a good indication that everything was functioning normally, but only a physical investigation of the structure and of the systems is going to be able to determine the true condition of the airplane at the time. The investigators will look very closely at that to ensure that there were no structural failures that had a role in causing this accident. Well, it's constructed with concrete because it needs a good foundation. That foundation should be in the ground, not on the ground. So it should be buried. And the metal poles that come out of that concrete are designed to fracture, to fail when they get hit, so that they don't cause undue damage. What comes into question in my mind when I saw the pictures of that is why was it exposed above the ground? It should have been buried deep in the ground. If I was investigating this accident, I would be really focused on to find out why that piece of concrete was not buried deeply in the ground. The real question is, how much damage did these recorders incur from the fire? The flight data recorder, which is an instrument that records a number of parameters, same thing with the voice recorder. It's very critical. In my view, I think it's critical that the voice recorder really tell what the pilots were facing, because it's very easy for people to blame the pilot, that the pilot made a mistake, and the voice recorder coupled with the flight data recorder is a very good way to determine whether it was the pilot's failure to do what he should be doing, or if it was mechanical failure that prevented him from doing what he needed to do. So it's very, very important from the pilot's point of view that we get that information. From the accident investigator's point of view, we can have a good investigation without the recorders. Just takes a lot more work and a lot more time. The NTSB has invested a lot of money in that laboratory for both the voice recorder and the flight data recorder. So when they get the box in Washington, they will gather a team together. The Korean Airlines and the Korean government will be there. Nobody will touch it when it's shipped in. And they will all gather together and dismantle the box. They will record everything that they touch, everything that they see, the condition of, until they get it down to the basic recording unit that's in the middle of the box. And ultimately, they will put it on the computers and they will download the information. And if it's a good recorder, they will have an awful lot of information to see. For example, one of the things that the 737 will tell you, the recorder will tell you, if the captain or the first officer in the cockpit pushed the rudder pedal, The most important thing from an accident investigator's point of view, who's looking for a good investigation, is to gather all the facts. So now we have the box and we're sending it back to Washington. We don't stop the investigation on the ground. We go through the investigation on the ground. We record with pictures, with video, and with pen and paper. We record everything we see of importance, everything that we think even remotely could have an effect on this. We record it all because you only get one opportunity for that. In another week or two, this area is going to be cleaned up. So you need to make sure you record everything you possibly can while you're on scene after an accident. The better the detail and that factual information, the better the outcome to the investigation. Typically, they will take about a year. Sometimes the more complicated ones take longer. I have been involved with a couple of accidents that went 4 or 5 years because they were so complicated in understanding them. One of them, I remember that we had very strong suspicions about one system on the airplane, but we kept working and working, and we couldn't, the system seemed to always work well, but we kept testing it and doing different tests under different conditions. And then finally one day the failure occurred and we knew we found it. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work when you don't know, and you've got to have that factual information. While I was with the National Transportation Safety Board, Korean Airlines 801 crashed in Guam, determining exactly why the airplane was where it was, given the navigational aids that are on the airplane and what was going on. And then we discovered that there was a navigation problem with the airport, and that system was turned off, but that's the system the captain thought was turned on, and he was flying it, and it wasn't working. So he didn't recognize it. And Guam, there's a lot of high hills, mountains. So the top of the mountains was in the clouds, so he couldn't see anything. So he's using his instruments, and his instruments failed. He didn't recognize that system wasn't working, even though it was on the NOTAMs. And there's a lot involved with that. And that's why all the different specialties come together to do an investigation.
What steps should the Korean and the U.S. investigative authorities take to ensure that fairness concerns are not raised during the investigation?
To be open, right, to share factual information, not what people think. And if you don't know, tell them you don't know. You know, sometimes people don't want to admit that there's something going on that they don't understand. You need to be honest. Open and honest cleans up a lot. In the U.S., we call that sunshine. You know, you don't work in the dark, you work in the sunshine so everybody can see what you're doing.
As you mentioned earlier, what exactly is the role of the NTSB?
The role of the NTSB is to gather all the facts and circumstances around an accident, analyze them, and then identify what the problem was and what we can do to repair that problem, to fix it. So essentially they're to investigate all the bits and pieces, analyze it, determine the most probable cause of the accident, and then say to the government and to the industry, you need to fix these areas. Do not take into consideration how much it costs. We leave that up to other people to figure out what it costs and what they can do. And if you take a look back throughout the last 60, 70 years, the accidents that we don't have anymore. When I was a young man, we would have accidents that were called material failures. Now, long before you were born, the British had an airplane called the Comet, and it had 4, 5, 6 failures that nobody could figure out why. And then we found the problem, and we changed the material that was used. We changed the process of how it was manufactured. So through the years, you almost never hear of material failures today. Almost, right? So that was one area of improvement. Procedures, the training for pilots. We have put so many accidents have occurred because of training issues with pilots. Today, the pilots are very, very well trained, and that is a result of previous accidents. And after the cause of the accident, you're going to come to the recommendations. This formula is all under the International Civil Aviation Organization, which every career is assignee to. That's one of the things that I always went to great lengths to tell the family members, I feel deeply for your loss, but it's not in vain, because it's going to drive improvement so other people won't have to feel your pain. To the authorities, I would just ask them, please pay attention to details. Get all the factual information you can and make sure you share it with everybody that needs to know in the investigation team. And to the families, I'd like to say that my heart goes out to them. I've been at accidents too many times with people. A lot of people have perished. It's very, very painful for the families, but it's also very painful for the accident investigators. And I can tell you that even though many accident investigators, and they're out there with a stone face and they show no emotion, when they go back to their hotel room or back home, they vent those feelings. You cannot be a human being and not be affected by what you see. Even though you might be able to keep a stone face at the time, when you're in private, you're going to feel it. When you put your head on that pillow, you're going to go through those thoughts in your mind over and over again. And in some ways, that actually drives the investigators to get to the bottom of it, right? It pushes them mentally. They push themselves to dig and make sure they find out what happened. Emotionally, yes. I had some professional help. A lot of investigators do. If it gets bad enough to keep you awake at night, then you should talk to a doctor who can help you unload it. I did a couple of big accidents within 3 months of each other, one in July and one in September, and both with high numbers of fatalities. And it weighs on you when you're walking through and you're seeing what's left of people. It gets to you. And it wasn't just me. In fact, we had, I worked for the airline that was involved in those crashes. And the whole team was we call it debriefed. The whole team had a collective meeting and one-on-one meetings with doctors, just to make sure that we didn't break. We call that PTSD. That's what it is. And you have to get rid of it. And sometimes you're not capable of getting rid of it, unloading it yourself. You need somebody to help you unload it.
Thank you for sharing those experiences. Are there any past aviation accidents you investigated that resemble this case?
There's pieces, but none exactly. Every airplane accident is a set of circumstances that are unique. They will have pieces of previous accidents, but the whole sequence of events is not. Most people don't realize that aviation accidents are a series of problems that lead to an accident. It's not uncommon to have, I did one airplane accident that had 8 different failures of people or equipment that led up to the accident. So that was 8 different places that if something was different, the accident wouldn't have happened. Early in my career, up until the time I became part of the federal government, I did a number of accidents, and I am not proud of the way my industry, I was an aviation airline employee, I am not proud of the way we treated the families. We treated them very poorly. And as a result, after the 2 accidents, the big accidents that I mentioned in 94 and 96 with TWA, the President of the United States actually told the NTSB and the rest of us in aviation that was going to change. And then as a result of that, the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, instituted the Office of Family Affairs So we actually had employees within the NTSB that would essentially communicate and make sure that the families knew exactly what was going on. And oftentimes, people at my level, at the board level, would actually meet with the families and talk to them about what we found and what we disclosed. And that was very effective in helping them understand what was going on, and also making the families realize that their loss won't be in vain, because their loss is going to drive changes to the airline business, either the airline or the government, going to drive changes in the processes that they use to prevent a reoccurrence of that type of accident.
How do you think the Korean government should respond to this issue? And also, is there anything you'd like to share about supporting the families?
They need to hear the information directly from the airline and from the government. They don't need to find it out in the newspaper. So if you're going to have a press conference that's going to discuss findings that you've made, have the courtesy to notify the families and maybe give them a private briefing beforehand. Might be even a phone call. You might have a bunch of people making phone calls to them. But some way so that they feel connected to their government and to their airline, and not just say they're over here on the side, read the newspaper and find out what's going on.